Hayden Panettiere has died at just 36 years old, leaving fans around the world asking the same question. What happened to Hayden Panettiere? The actress became a familiar face to millions of viewers from a very young age, building a career that stretched across television, film, and some of Hollywood's biggest franchises. But her story was about much more than the characters she played. Hayden first appeared on television as a child, including a role on Guiding Light, before taking on a series of film and television projects. She appeared in movies including Remember the Titans, Ice Princess, and Bring It On, All or Nothing. Then came the role that changed everything. In Heroes, Hayden played Claire Bennett, a teenager with a remarkable ability to heal from injuries. The series became a major hit, and Hayden quickly became one of its most recognizable young stars. Hayden Panettiere has died at just 36 years old, leaving fans around the world asking the same question. What happened to Hayden Panettiere? The actress became a familiar face to millions of viewers from a very young age, building a career that stretched across television, film, and some of Hollywood's biggest franchises. But her story was about much more than the characters she played. Hayden first appeared on television as a child, including a role on Guiding Light, before taking on a series of film and television projects. She appeared in movies including Remember the Titans, Ice Princess, and Bring It On, All or Nothing. Then came the role that changed everything. In Heroes, Hayden played Claire Bennett, a teenager with a remarkable ability to heal from injuries. The series became a major hit, and Hayden quickly became one of its most recognizable young stars. For many fans, Claire Bennett is still the role they immediately associate with her. But Hayden's career didn't stop there. She later became the star of Nashville, playing Juliet Barnes, a talented but complicated country music performer. The role allowed Hayden to show a completely different side of her acting abilities and earned her a new generation of fans. She also became part of the Scream franchise, playing Kirby Reed, another character that became particularly memorable among horror fans. And that explains why searches for Hayden's name have exploded. Some people are searching because they remember her from Heroes. Others know her from Nashville, Scream, Ice Princess, or her earlier movies. But many others are asking something much more difficult. How did Hayden Panettiere die? And that's where things become important, because while her death has been reported, her cause of death has not been publicly disclosed at the time of reporting. That hasn't stopped people from searching for answers. And to understand why so many people are asking what happened to Hayden, we need to look back at the very public struggle she had previously discussed throughout her life. But Hayden Panettiere's life away from the cameras was very different from the glamorous image many people had of her. Over the years, Hayden became increasingly open about some of the personal struggles she faced while growing up in Hollywood and dealing with the pressures that came with fame. She had previously spoken publicly about addiction, depression, and recovery, as well as some of the difficult experiences she went through during adulthood. These weren't just stories appearing in tabloids. Hayden herself chose to discuss many of these experiences publicly, including in her memoir, This Is Me, a memoir, where she reflected on different chapters of her life and the challenges she had faced. That openness also changed the way many fans viewed her. Instead of simply being remembered as the young actress from Heroes, Hayden became someone who was willing to talk about subjects that are often kept private, including mental health, addiction, and the difficulties of trying to rebuild your life while the public is watching. But there's an important distinction here. Because searches for Hayden Panettiere cause of death, Hayden Panettiere addiction, and Hayden Panettiere illness are now appearing together, it's easy for people online to make assumptions. We should not do that. Her previous struggles are part of her documented life story, but they should not be presented as the reason for her death, unless an official cause is released. She shares a daughter, Kaya Evdokia Klitschko, with former professional heavyweight boxing champion Vladimir Klitschko. Their relationship attracted enormous media attention, but Hayden's role as a mother became one of the most important parts of her personal life. Over the years, there were also many public discussions about Hayden's relationship with Vladimir, their daughter, and the difficult decisions surrounding parenting while Hayden was dealing with her own struggles. That's why searches such as Hayden Panettiere daughter, Vladimir Klitschko, Hayden Panettiere, and did Hayden Panettiere give up custody of her daughter have also surged. But behind all those headlines was a much more complicated personal story, one involving family, recovery, motherhood, and a life that was constantly being discussed in public. And then, shortly before her death, Hayden appeared to be entering another chapter of her life. She had been speaking more openly about her experiences, reconnecting with her audience, and sharing glimpses of her life publicly. One of those moments would eventually become especially significant. Because on July 27th, Hayden shared what would become her final Instagram post. And just weeks later, fans were suddenly looking back at that post in a completely different way. And then came the final public glimpse of Hayden Panettiere's life. On July 27th, 2026, Hayden shared what would become her final Instagram post. In the photo, she appeared alongside photographer Randall Slavin, smiling and spending time with a friend. The caption was simple: "Good times and good friends." At the time, there was nothing to suggest that the post would later become one of the last public moments fans would have of Hayden. But after news of her death broke, people began returning to that photograph and looking at it very differently. For fans, it became a reminder of just how quickly circumstances can change. And it also brought renewed attention to Hayden's recent years. She had been increasingly open about her personal experiences, including the difficult periods she had gone through and the process of trying to move forward. Her memoir, This Is Me, a Memoir, gave her another opportunity to tell parts of that story in her own words, rather than allowing headlines to tell it for her. That makes the timing of her death particularly difficult for longtime fans. Hayden wasn't simply an actress from an older television series. She had been part of popular culture for decades. People watched her grow from a child performer into a major television star. They watched her become Claire Bennett in Heroes. They followed her journey as Juliet Barnes in Nashville. And horror fans remembered her as Kirby Reed in Scream 4 and later Scream 6. So when reports of her death emerged, a huge number of people immediately began searching for the same questions. What happened to Hayden Panettiere? How did Hayden Panettiere die? What did Hayden Panettiere die from? And perhaps most importantly, has her cause of death been revealed? At the time of reporting, the answer is no confirmed public cause of death has been released. That point is extremely important because social media can move much faster than verified information. There are already searches connecting Hayden's death with her previous struggles, her health, her addiction history, and even other tragedies involving members of her family. But none of those searches automatically provide an answer. A search query is not evidence, and a previous health struggle is not automatically a cause of death. Until an official source provides more information, the responsible answer is simply that her cause of death remains undisclosed. There are also searches about Hayden's former relationship with Brian Hickerson, another major part of the actress's public history. Hickerson and Hayden were in a relationship that received significant media attention, particularly because of legal and domestic abuse allegations surrounding their time together. But again, that is part of Hayden's past and should not be presented as an explanation for her death without evidence. The same applies to questions about her former partner Vladimir Klitschko, her daughter Kaya, and the death of her brother Jansen. These are important parts of Hayden's life story, but they don't answer the central question of what caused her death. And right now, that question remains unanswered. What we do know is that Hayden Panettiere was only 36 years old, and one of her final public messages was a simple photograph celebrating friendship and good times. A post that seemed completely ordinary at the time has now taken on a very different meaning for the millions of people who followed her career. And as the world remembers Hayden, there's one more question worth asking. What will her legacy actually be? So what will people remember most about Hayden Panettiere? For some, it will always be Claire Bennett, the fearless young woman from Heroes who became one of television's most recognizable characters. For others, she'll be Juliet Barnes from Nashville, a complicated character whose personal struggles and ambition gave Hayden one of the defining performances of her career. And for horror fans, she'll remain Kirby Reed, the character she brought to life in the Scream franchise. But Hayden's legacy goes beyond those roles. She spent much of her life in front of cameras, growing up in an industry where personal struggles could become public headlines almost overnight. In later years, she chose to speak openly about some of the challenges she faced, including addiction, mental health, and recovery. She also spoke about motherhood, her daughter Kaya, and the experiences that shaped her as a person away from Hollywood. Her memoir gave fans an opportunity to hear parts of that story directly from her perspective. And now, after her death at just 36, those conversations are being revisited by millions of people. Some are discovering Hayden's work for the first time. Others are returning to Heroes, Nashville, Scream, and her earlier movies. And many are simply trying to understand how someone they watched for so many years could be gone so unexpectedly. The biggest question remains the same. What did Hayden Panettiere die from? At the time of reporting, her cause of death has not been publicly disclosed. That means any claims circulating online about addiction, depression, illness, medication, or other possible explanations should be treated as speculation, unless confirmed by an official source. And that distinction matters. Hayden had openly discussed difficult chapters of her life, but those experiences should not automatically be connected to her death. The same applies to her brother Jansen's death, her former relationships, or any other event from her past. There may eventually be more information, but until then, the most accurate thing we can say is that Hayden Panettiere has died at 36. Her family is mourning her, fans are remembering her work, and many questions about her death remain unanswered. Her final Instagram post, shared only weeks earlier, showed her smiling and enjoying time with a friend. The caption said, "Good times and good friends." It was an ordinary moment that nobody could have known would become so significant. And perhaps that's the most human part of this story. Behind the headlines, the television roles, and the celebrity news was a woman who lived a complicated life, experienced enormous success, faced difficult personal battles, became a mother, and continued trying to move forward. Hayden Panettiere's career may have begun when she was just a child, but her impact lasted for decades. From Heroes to Nashville, from Scream to her many earlier roles, she left behind characters that millions of people will continue to remember. And as fans search for answers about her final days, one thing is already certain. Hayden Panettiere's work will outlive the headlines surrounding her death. May she rest in peace.